to take some time to kind of discuss assignment one with you, especially through looking at an example of the assignment that I went ahead and did. If you haven't read the instructions yet for assignment one, go ahead and go back and read those before watching the rest of this. I'm going to assume that we're all working off of a basic standpoint of having at least read through the instructions. All right, so what I've done here is I'm going to kind of show you how I brainstormed some of this to result in my final product. So the first part of my brainstorming was I wanted to make sure that I went ahead and chose a key signature as per the instructions that had at least 3 sharps or 3 flats. In this case, I've chosen the 4 flats in the key signature. And then I also wanted to make sure that I had a bass line that is ascending stepwise throughout the series of 4 chords, which is what I've done here, and I marked those with the arrows. And then again, with the 4 chords that I use, making sure that at least 2 of them are in inverted form. So here I have a second inversion 7th chord here, and a third inversion here, right? So I'm trying to do as much as I can to engineer success for the assignment by following the requirements here, okay? So I brainstormed it by looking at those here, and then what I've done is I've continued a brainstorming session by taking all of that and kind of exploding it onto the grand staff, and I did that so that I could take an inventory of all the pitches that I'm going to need for the 4 chords that I came up with, right? So I started off with a 1-7 chord, which means it's going to be in root position with the A flat being the 1 chord, and then I have a 5th here, I have a 3rd here, and then I need the 7th here, okay? And I did a similar inventory here with a 5-4-3, so it's going to be a chord based off of the 5th scale degree. So in the key of A flat, that scale degree is in E flat. So an E flat 7th chord with the 5th of the chord in the bass. That's why you see the B flat here, okay? By the way, I'm going through this part fairly quickly. If you need to go back and watch the videos on identifying the chords and the inversions, that might be helpful. So anyway, I did a pitch inventory for all the chords that I wanted to use through all 4 bars. And I just want to point out that the numbered bars here was just me making sure that I followed the instructions of the assignment and had a 4-bar chord progression. Okay, so I kind of use this as a working template for when I go and do the actual composition. So here we are. Here are the first 4 bars that I came up with. Also, I wanted to point out that I am in the key in the time signature of 6/8, and just for my own benefit, I want to make sure that I mark the key that I'm in up here, and I've done that down here as well. Okay, 6/8 on both lines. Okay, so here's what I've come up with. You can see that I went ahead and ensured that I included all of the notes of the chord in each bar as instructed in the assignment. So obviously I have the bass line here carrying the root of the chord in this case. The 5th is here, the 3rd is here, the 7th is here, okay? Also, I should point out that I wrote myself a little note in red, no NCTs. As we'll discover later this term, an NCT is a non-chord tone, or a pitch that doesn't, go in the chord that I'm analyzing. And as per the assignment, I can't use any notes outside of the chord that I'm working on within any given bar. So that's just a note to self, not to, go so far afield that I use notes that don't belong to the chord. So anyways, continuing on, I check my inventory against the notes that I use, or check the notes against my inventory, whichever way you want to think about it, and I make sure to include all the relevant pitches, right, in each bar. Okay, so that kind of gets me through. It's some of the basic requirements for these first 4 bars. I also wanted to pay attention to the part of the assignment that said to make sure I had an interesting melodic line. And one of the things I found as I was going through this is that was a bit of a challenge, because if I look at the notes that belong to these chords, there isn't a whole lot of difference in terms of pitch content among the 4 different chords that I have here. In fact, 2 notes that are constant to all of these are the G and the E flat. So I had to get kind of thoughtful and creative about how I wanted to create some melodic interest. So I realized that I didn't have to stay in the octaves that I inventoried here, which is why you see things like a B flat popping up in here, as opposed to where I had it in the inventory down an octave below, and a couple of E flats here. And that gave me some room to create a little bit more interest in the upper line. Okay, so that's how I constructed the first 4 bars. Now the next 4 bars the instructions were pretty specific. They said I needed to use the exact same chord progression, and I interpreted that quite literally. In other words, I didn't even change the inversion, right? So I stuck with a 1-7, then a 5-4-3, then a 3-7, then a 5-4-2 or 5-2, and then I also had to create some contrast, and I was allowed to use some rests. So it took me a little bit of while. Took me a little bit of time to come up with that. In fact, I had to take a break from the assignment so I could kind of go clear my head of the stuff I'd already done, so I could come back and try something different. And so this is what I came up with for the second set of 4 bars. You can see right off the bat it's a little bit more rhythmically active. So what I've done here, though, just so I didn't get so creative, so to speak, that I forgot to take care of the assignment itself, I still had to go through an inventory and make sure that I included all the relevant pitches of each chord, right? So let me talk a little bit about some of the contrast that I worked in, because that's part of the assignment as well. One of the things I did to create contrast between what I'll call part 1 here and part 2, or the variation here, is you can see that the general direction of the right hand trends upward, at least through the beginning of the 4th bar here. So to contrast that, you'll see that the general direction here trends downward, at least through the beginning of the 4th bar of part 2. Okay. Also, as I've already indicated, there's more rhythmic activity in the second part than there is in the first part, and that creates a sound that's a little more introspective, right, in the beginning here, and a little more extroverted, a little more playful in the second part. Another thing that you'll notice is I do go ahead and I use a rest here, and I used one there just because, why not? I want you to notice something maybe a little more subtle in terms of the rhythmic construction of this thing. In the first part, I really just use one rhythm, or at least I'll say one rhythm in the right hand that dominates, and it appears in each of these 3 bars, right, before settling into something a little bit different in the 4th bar here. And so each of these it is called a rhythmic motive or motif, and it's a 1-bar motive, whereas in the second part, I use actually a 2-bar motive. So it takes the entirety of 2 bars to kind of get this rhythmic template, which I then reuse here, at least more or less reuse. So that's another difference. One of the things I did is I kept the bass line constant, right? Just because I did want this whole thing to sound like it was really cut from the same cloth. I wanted there to be a bit of a unity, so it wasn't so contrasting in the second part that it sounded like just a different piece. So those are some of the things I did to create some contrast. I did want to talk about the last bar. As I said, I have a sense of melodic ascent in the first 4 bars here. Right, I'm rising, but then in the last bar, in the 4th bar, it kind of goes in decline, and the rhythm is a little bit, very calm here. Whereas in the second part, as I said, the rhythm is trending downward, but then in the last bar, I go up, and I do so with a lot of rhythmic energy. So those are just a few of the things that I did to try to create some contrast and some difference. And hopefully this, all of this gives you but just kind of something to work from. What I did is I placed a PDF of this in Canvas of my example, knowing full well that there'd be no way for you to plagiarize it because I purposely used a chord progression that you're not allowed to use. But in any event, I hope this is helpful as you contemplate your own assignment.